Thank you. For those who don't speak English, there is, I believe, some headsets over there. So I'm Linda, I'm the CEO of International Sustainable Finance Center, which is a think tank located here in Prague. We are a research institution and we are not for profit. So what will we cover today? We will actually talk about whether the sustainable finance and sustainability, is it a passing trend, or will it actually change business and finance as we know it? So what will we cover today? First of all, we need to understand the context. There are the so-called mega trends or things that are not passing. They will be there for 10, 20, potentially 40 years, and they're accelerating. We will talk about what actually is sustainable finance and how it emerged. We'll touch upon the legislative framework, but I will not bore you with that. I'll talk about the taxonomy, and then we'll talk, most interestingly, about the pressure points and transmission channels. So how does it actually work? Where the financial system is changing and where the pressures are rising on business. And finally, we will do a very simple look at what are the main things you need to look at when you look at ESG in business. So first of all, what is the context? The context is actually science. We only have had scientific research and data collection on climate for the last maybe 50 years. In the last 10 years, we have accelerated in terms of technology. So in the next 10 years, we will have satellite data and ability to monitor the natural environment to an extent that we have never had the ability to do. What does this mean? Well, this means that we will have even more data, even more transparency, and the data will allow us to have a look at where is the greatest environmental degradation and which businesses operate in those jurisdictions. This is a key game changer going forward. Here you can see some of the very basic things about the planetary boundaries. So the planet's natural resources can regenerate themselves only to an extent. If our current business and financial system is extracting too much, well, guess what? Agricultural systems will suffer. Fisheries actually are one of the first business models under scrutiny, and we will start to talk about water, which will be the next oil. Here you can see the ones that are the boundaries which we are operating within safe operating space, and the ones where we are entering unknown, uncharted waters in terms of systematic effect. Why does that matter? Well, it matters because sustainability is not a new idea. I think that's something that people don't understand. In Europe, we always argue that we're all Christian because that's the evolution of our ethics and systems. Well, guess what? We actually start with churches in the 1600s, 1800s, where people thought that certain things were not okay. Under our ethical understanding, we didn't really like certain things being financed. In 1960s, you had ethical investing taking really shape in terms of civil rights, anti-war movements, etc. Now you have the idea of sin stocks, very important thing, which up until the war in Ukraine, people usually didn't really like weapons companies. Now that's maybe changing. But the point is that once we started focusing on climate, you can actually see very rapid acceleration. So the information and the public pressure combined with the understanding of science is driving the regulatory developments. And as you can see, they're not slowing down, they're speeding up and they're tightening. So sustainable finance, just like risk as a concept, which emerged in the 70s in the US, sustainable finance is a relatively new concept. This is why people don't usually understand, well, what makes sustainable finance different from regular finance? And we always argue it's not different, it's exactly the same, but with more data. And non-financial data actually is becoming financial. Here you can see that policy and regulatory reaction is actually reaction to climate risk. It's to minimize your losses. If your company that you invest in is located in an area which is running out of water, and it's a company that manufactures something with a high reliance on this particular water cost, Well, guess what? It doesn't take much to understand that maybe you should talk to this company and convince them to do something about their water supply. The same thing is related to forestry, agriculture, and a variety of different sectors. So in different sectors, the materiality is different. So that's also important to remember. Sustainable finance doesn't look the same for every sector. So sustainable finance is probably the leader in this space is the EU. Understandably so. We have one of the greatest global accumulations of wealth. And we have a democracy. So that means that the pressures interact. I was there in Paris when the Paris Agreement was signed, and that was a landmark moment when actually the scientists, experts, and civil society was very excited. That directly led to the EU Green Deal becoming a real thing. But what we need to figure out is how are we going to actually finance the Green Deal? And this is where we got stuck. So what makes an economic activity or an investment green? If you're going to price it in an open market, how do you know which one's green, which one's not, and how do you allocate the premium? So this is why the EU Sustainable Finance agenda is so important. And this is where the taxonomy comes in. We know that there's a lot of myth about the taxonomy. It's overly complicated, hard to use, and 188 pages of legislation makes nobody happy. Well, I have some good news for you. There is a new mandate for the platform, and we are working very diligently to make the taxonomy great again. This means that there will be a lot of more educational material, guidelines. We will work on data and usability so that it is actually easier for the market participants to ask questions, feed the feedback into the work, and also finally be able to understand and use the taxonomy for their own benefit. Here you can see the 6 environmental objectives. Currently, the Commission has a consultation period, so anybody wanting to comment on the taxonomy, please do. And all eligible economic activities need to meet these 3 particular criteria. There will be also guidelines in terms of what these criteria mean, how to interpret it. Because the main thing is that while we start with the application of this piece of legislation to big corporates, in 2026, 2027, we will have the SMEs having to report. And that will change everything. Because while you still have another few years to learn, at one point it will become mandatory. And at that stage, the scrutiny will be on, because organizations like ours and others will scrutinize the reports. There probably will be ratings all across the place trying to score how well people are reporting. If you're the best in class, well, guess what? Everybody will want to finance you because there's not that many businesses that do good reporting. So the EU taxonomy, what is it really for? So number one, we need a common language. I'm sure everybody's read multiple articles about ESG ratings, ESG's aggregate confusion, alphabet soup, you name it. Well, guess what? This actually gives us a common classification system. It is based on science and technical screening criteria, so objectively linked and updated based on best scientific knowledge, and it allows monitoring and reporting of capital expenditures. This is very important. This will be closely monitored and will be assessed. The aims were actually to increase the transparency and to limit greenwashing, so you can't call everything green, because it's not. Very importantly, it does not mandate particular investments. So as an investor or as a bank, it doesn't mean that anybody is dictating you what to invest in. You make that decision yourself. So here you actually see the pressure points and transmission channels. So this is how the financial system interacts with all these different pieces of legislation. We are quite visual people at ISFC, so you should see the amounts of mind maps and different interaction channels that we create. But I think it's very important to understand that every single financial institution is trying to understand how they integrate sustainability. This means that once they've built up the knowledge, the capacities, and have changed their process, it will affect business. Because at one point, you will actually have the correct process to absorb the information and to integrate into your lending, which means that there will be preferential conditions on certain loans because they will be lower risk. We will also see one more important thing. DG ESMA at the European Commission will start regulating, or at least will have some sort of a definition of greenwashing. So business as usual will not be quite as easy. You won't be able to say, oh, but even though I'm investing 60 billion into oil, I'm actually shifting because I have 1 million in renewables. So that kind of intention will not be possible to sell. Here you can see the different parts of the system pressurizing companies to become more transparent. ESG rating agencies, that will also get some regulation. And going forward, there might be consolidation, or there might be best-in-class competition for the best rating, the most rigid rating that shows you that these are definitely the best companies. Finally, here you see how the system interacts in terms of the different parts of reporting and disclosures. You can see how, starting from companies, how actually the information will flow and what kind of information is required in which part. We predominantly work with the financial sector. So daily we interact with banks, asset managers, and investment funds. And we can see how they are starting to raise questions. Do I have a real problem with this portfolio? In most cases, yes, they do. Because sometimes it will be much, much costlier to refinance a particular business if all of a sudden you realize that, well, they might not have free allowances for emissions. Their margins are shrinking because of different variety of legislation kicking into their export markets. And let's not forget, most of our exports flow to Western Europe, where the thinking is quite far. When we started our event a year ago, we realized that the conversation here is approximately 5 to 10 years delayed. So I think we have a fantastic opportunity to actually leapfrog. Let's learn from all the things that people have tried and that don't work. By now, in the next few months, the Commission, the platform, will actually publish best case studies. Use them. It's free information. You don't even need expensive consulting to achieve quite a lot. And here you see the main things why ESG in business actually is beneficial. This can actually be calculated, and we have done some analysis for some companies in terms of what is your upside if you integrate ESG correctly and do it for your sector. And finally, I want to thank Jeffrey and the Atos Group for a fantastic event, and I hope that this event will become a real fixture for Prague. And we also hope to see you in our event, which will happen next month, where we will look at each of these topics in depth.